John, why do you love character-driven films?
I think it goes back to when I was a kid and I would watch movies in theaters or sometimes even things I saw on television. And I would get so involved with these characters. And I grew up in Brooklyn, kind of a working class neighborhood. So any opportunity that I had to be transported, out of that into a different world where people I didn't know anything about, I was always very interested in that. But the most important thing for me, I think that inspired me most, was those moments in the theater where I would sit there and recognize something in a character that I recognized from myself. And I realized I'm not alone. And that, to me, was the single most powerful thing that bonded me to storytelling and to movies. And very early on, I thought to myself, I would love to make someone feel that way. I would love to tell a story that someone sits there and goes, oh, wow, that's me. That's my family. I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not a misfit. There's somebody else. So that's really why I love it so much. And I've always tried to, everything I do, I try to make sure it's informed with, interesting characters and some depth and an arc, of somewhere to go.
Do you remember those first few movies that you saw wherever you were in New York?
I do. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but the first movie I saw, my mother took me to at the Lowe's Oriental in Brooklyn. And it was called Madam X, Joan Crawford. And, as I remember the plot, she had to give up her baby, when she was a young woman. And then years later, she gets accused of murder. And she finds this lawyer to defend her, and it's her son, And it was so fraught with, emotion. If I saw it today, it would probably be too much emotion. I don't know. Maybe it's too sentimental, but I was so, I was probably like 8 or 9 when I saw that film. And first, just being in a movie theater, I was so, wow, this is like so transportive as already. The curtains opened, and I just felt the hair on my neck go up. And I was very, very emotionally affected by that movie. And on the bus going back to our apartment in Brooklyn, I started to cry. And I said to my mother, because at the end, I guess, she never revealed herself to her son. And so the secret remained. And I begged her, don't ever leave me, So, I think that was one of the first movies I saw that really made me feel very powerfully attracted to this idea of telling stories.
That's a great story.
Yeah. And I saw another movie on TV, this was. If you remember the old Hallmark Hall of Fame, before that whole brand was kind of diluted by the Hallmark Channel. But the Hallmark Hall of Fame was like the prestige television in the 50s and 60s and all the way up to fairly recently. And there was a TV production of Arthur Miller's The Price with George C. Scott and Barry Sullivan. And it was about these two brothers who came to their father's house. Their father just passed away. And they had to split up the stuff. And there was an interesting character who was there too. I guess he was like I don't know if he's a pawnbroker, but he was somebody who was going to sell and buy the stuff. And it was a great, I think George C. Scott was a brother who had become a cop, and the other brother was a more white-collar guy, and one had left and one stayed to take care of the father. So all these great, interesting, family dynamics. And again, I was very young when I saw that film. I couldn't have been much more than 11 or so, I guess. But I was, again, just so struck by the truth that I saw in these relationships and the raw emotion and the way the actors performed it. I was just so completely taken away by it. And I have to say, just then going ahead many years, I was thrilled when I got to direct my first Hallmark Hall of Fame. And I was telling them when they hired me, I said, you have no idea the history I have with your show, and how it was one of the things that inspired me, to be a director, be a writer-director and tell stories.
What does it mean to understand your characters?
Well, I think as a writer, for me, it comes first from writing characters that you recognize. There might be combinations of people either personally or people you imagine. And oftentimes, for me, I think most writers, there are aspects of yourself that you put in a character. I really feel like that is the most important thing in storytelling is the character. And It's one of the things I always tell students who are starting out in film, because so many young people starting out, and I was one of them many, many years ago, but I felt, and a lot of the young people feel very enamored with the technology. It's all about the lenses and what can be done in the digital and the effects in it, and the characters get lost. And so I always try to emphasize to students how important it is to be observant of the world around you, to try to understand the people you see. Like, I live in New York, so I'm a great student of behavior. Just to go on the subway and sit there and watch people, it's fascinating. I never get bored. If I have to meet somebody on a street corner and they're late, it's fine, because there's just a show going on everywhere I look. And I think it's really important to attune yourself to that, and also your ear for dialogue, to listen to the way people speak, how they express themselves, what are they really saying, what's the subtext, what's going on underneath what they're saying. And so I feel like those are things that I urge students to expose themselves to, and not only in real life, but also in literature and theater and music. Not just watch movies all the time, because then you're just really making movies that are influenced by other movies. Going back to some like my heroes in the old Hollywood days, the John Fords and John Huston and Orson Welles, all these fabulous storytellers, Preston Sturges, and all of their work was so full of quirky, interesting, real characters. And those filmmakers all had really rich, interesting lives before they ever became filmmakers. And even John Huston, who obviously came from film royalty, his father was Walter Huston, but even he had left Hollywood, and he was a boxer, he was a newspaper reporter, he was homeless for a great deal of time. So when he came back to make his movies, he brought with it this depth of knowledge about life and people. And so that's what I really feel is so important for people to, because the technology of it, it's fantastic. But as a director, your job is simply to know, what the story you want to tell is and how you want to see it. And it's really somebody else's job to now execute that, which doesn't mean that you give up any control. But when I was first starting out, I was lucky enough to kind of twig to that early on. So instead of trying to figure out, oh no, how would this shot work? How can I possibly see this guy come from here and then go over there, all in the same shot? I would just sit down with the DP, the director of photography, and say, here's what I want to see. I want to take this guy out of the thing, and we follow him in here, and then we bring him up here. How do we do that? And then they'll find a way. So then after 35 years, you get to know how you don't have to ask anymore. You get to do it. But I do think, as something I always tell students, is that don't be so intimidated by the technology or so enamored of it that you're frozen in the other areas that are so important about storytelling. Because if you surround yourself with really talented people, you get a great assistant director, you get a great camera person, fantastic sound crew, a script supervisor who's really smart. Those people will help you. They'll guide you through, as long as you're respectful and you let them know that you need their help. But your job is to focus on your vision and what you want to see, and then they'll help you figure out how to actually see it.
I love too what you said about public transportation. I grew up taking the bus everywhere as well,
Yeah.
and it is a fascinating. I mean, you can meet some great people, and some scary ones too, but some great people that'll just open up. And even the bus drivers will tell you everything,
Yeah,
and you can
it's true.
really just soak in life. Public libraries, things like that.
Yeah, and it's funny because when I do come to Los Angeles, usually I'm here for a limited amount of time. And, I'm always driving everywhere I go. And there are some days where I'm doing multiple meetings where I realize, wow, I have not even touched the air today. I've gone from my hotel to the garage, the car, to another garage, another office back there. And so at the end of the day, I haven't even been outside. And so I always find that I used to worry about living here, if I ever lived here full time, that sense of being cut off a little bit from life around you. And in New York, of course, that's impossible. You can't, you have to just stay in your apartment. But everywhere you go, stores, the streets, just teeming with drama. all around you. And in fact, I do this thing on my Twitter feed where every now and again I'll put overheard, and I'll come up with a little piece of dialogue that I just happen to hear. And it's great. Not long ago I heard somebody just walking by me on their cell phone, and I just heard them saying, "I'm all out of body bags. Check with me in March."
Oh no, gosh.
That's great. Where does that come from?
Oh my gosh, professional autopsies? I
Right.
don't know.
What is that? So it's great to just try to stay in tune with what's going on around you and be a sponge. I'll tell people that it wouldn't even be conscious at a certain point as you're writing, that these things you have observed and absorbed just start to seep into it, and you start to see these characters and hear them, and you'll start to hear these familiar voices. Oh yeah, this is that guy. I know who this is. Always the greatest moment in writing. Any writer will say this. It's not my original thing, but the greatest moment, either in a script or in a fiction, when the characters start to rebel against you. And you have a plan, you're going to go here, this is where we're going with the story, this is what's happening. And suddenly, as you're writing it, you could just feel like it's just not working. They're resisting it. They don't want to go in this direction. And they want to go this way. And then I'll follow them now. And when that doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's just like golden. And that's where a good understanding of character really, really helps you out.
And is that your signal to you that this is the right direction with this? Like, I know this is a real character now.
Absolutely. And it's frustrating sometimes because you realize, oh no, I've been on the wrong path for the whole first act of the script. And now I've on the right path, great, but now I got to go back and rewrite everything. But it's a gift, and you just take it. But yeah, if that happens to me, then I realize, oh yes, I'm in the zone. And now the characters are telling me what they want to do, so they've come to life. They're real now, and I pay attention.
Are there times when the characters fall flat and you feel there is no resistance, and then you realize, should I cut this character, or do I need to really work on who this is?
Yeah, there are moments where, there's always that deadly thing where I feel like I know what this character is going to say next, and you can't have that. You just cannot. You don't want to be in a situation where the character starts to say something, and now, okay, we all know what the rest of that sentence is going to be. So when that starts to happen a lot, then I have to kind of sit down and just rethink that character. But I will say, oftentimes, there's a danger in that as well, because it can stop you, in the middle of your story, in the middle of your work. It's like, okay, now I got to stop and figure. So what I tend to do is I just go through the script, start to finish, and get it done. And as I'm going, I know, okay, this isn't right. This is not going to be, I'm going to have to work on this. But I'm not going to stop now, because then I may never finish. I may just get bogged down on this for who knows how long. And I'm going to learn things about the rest of the story as I go along, even though it's not quite right yet. So I will do everything I can. I try to even read, like when I come down in the morning to work, I don't even read what I wrote yesterday, because I'll just get bogged down. I'll start to fix it. I'll start to worry about it. I just want to get that words on paper, that sort of vomit out of the story. And then once that's done, that's a huge step. And then I go back, and now that's when the real writing begins. Once that first draft is done, and I can go back in and I try to take a little rest from it. I have people read it. My wife, Melissa Jo Peltier, is just brilliant with story and everything else in the world. And she will give me great feedback about what works, what doesn't work. And so once you've had a little outside eyes on the material, then you can go back in and start to really mold it and shape it. But even on the second draft, I do the same with every draft. I don't stop. I just keep going. Even when I know I'm going to throw this out, I'm going to probably throw out this entire second act. But I got to keep going to get to the end, and then I'll start over again.
How does a character drive plot?
It's about what they want and what they need and their conflicts and their flaws. It's one of the first things most actors will look at when they're judging a script or want to play this role is, what's this character's flaw? What's the problem with this character that they have to overcome or that drives them? So drama, I think, is all about what does the character want, and what are they willing to do to get it? What can they do to get it? What are the stakes going to be? and then it just builds hopefully from there. You know, there's always that great debate about what comes first, plot or character. And I've always found in my work there's no rule. Sometimes I'll get an idea for a plot that will kind of like something I'll read in the newspaper or something I'll see, and I'm like, oh wow, wouldn't that be interesting? And then I got to figure out how to populate it with people, and how can I invest this person with a need and a flaw and an opportunity, and now put them in that plot. And then there's other times where I come up with a character, or I just know, man, that is a funny person. I'd love to see that person. And so then it's about how to build it around them. So either one can come first, but ultimately it's what the characters want, I think.
Why do you think so many writers bicker about plot versus character?
Well, I think it might be because we're all looking for formula. We'd all love a template. Please, just tell me how to write. Just please tell me what I get. Here's a formula. You do this, you do that. That's why I think so many of these screenwriting books are so successful, because they sort of promise, okay, you've got the idea, that's great, but now I'm going to show you how to apply that idea and make it work. And not that there aren't great. I mean, I've read them all, and not that there aren't great things to learn from those books. But ultimately, you just have to be careful to not rely on something outside yourself to come up with a plot, or a story. And a friend of mine he wanted to be a writer so badly, and he wasn't very good. And I was recommending books for him to read. And he read a bunch of them, and I said to him, so, did it help? Was it helpful? He said, well, not really. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about, how to write, but there was nothing about what to write. So I said, man, if you don't have anything to write about, you're not in the right business. You just got to do something else.
Yeah, that's the real problem, is you have too much to write about. There's too many things. Yeah. Right. Do you ever find yourself being too precious with your characters where you don't want to give them certain flaws, or that's never been an issue?
It's almost the opposite. I sometimes find myself hobbling them, with too much darkness, too much stuff they're fighting. And, I'll get feedback and saying, well, it's hard to root for this person because they're a little too dark. So often I have to kind of pull back on that sometimes and give them a little more light than heaviness.
Sure. Well, just off camera, we were talking about White Irish Drinkers, and that's from 2010?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, and I felt all of the characters had some flaws, maybe some more than others, but I felt that each one I could see maybe where they were coming from. I didn't see one that was, even the one unlikable, you could say, I won't give it away, but you could see where his character might be coming from,
right,
and cut him some slack.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I enjoyed that, because even the one that was supposedly the squeaky clean one, there were a few flaws, nothing too bad, but where everybody had their own things they were struggling with, and it was a beautiful job.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
It's great to hear that. And I think that one of the most important things to keep in mind from a writing point of view, and also from an acting point of view, is that even like the worst villain in life doesn't think they're a villain. Everyone thinks what they're doing is the right thing, even if it's just for them. So, people don't go, man, I'm really bad, and I'm going to do this now because I'm a bad person. They're thinking that I'm misunderstood. I'm hated. No one likes me. I never got the breaks. I never got the chance. Whatever it is that leads them to think, so I deserve to rob this bank. It's not I'm a bad person. I just. And so that's, I think, an important thing with characters. That's why it's fun for me to write villains, because I love them. I love them, and I want them to have full lives. And I don't expect the audience to like them, but I want them to understand them and to feel and to recognize them. That's the most important thing. Yeah, I've seen that person. I know that person. When All in the Family first premiered, which for many of your viewers will probably be too young to remember that, but it was the first time on television there was that kind of overtly prejudiced, bigoted, working class character. And the switchboard to CBS lit up because they'd say, hey, my dad's on TV. That's my uncle. That's my, And so there's nothing more magical, I think, than hitting that button with an audience of like, oh, there's a specific character, but there's a universal thing that I recognize and feel with that character.
And it was so great to have the Rob Reiner character butt up against Archie Bunker and two polar opposites and both very, very strong in their opinions.
Right,
And it was excellent, yeah.
And the longer you got to know Archie Bunker, because at first you hated him, like this guy's despicable. But the more you got to know him, the more you start to understand, the more they led you into his past and how he was brought up and his experiences as a kid and the disadvantages he had. And you start to understand what formed his worldview. So even though you can't agree with it, you say, yeah, I understand how a guy like that comes to this place where he hates people who are different. He can't understand people. He's frightened by people who are different. And that's a huge step towards making people understand each other.
How do you develop a character flaw?
Well, again, I look within. I start inside. What are the things I hate about myself that I would like to change? I like to think that sometimes by writing about it, I can even maybe fix it. It just hasn't happened yet. So, I mean, that's the basic thing. And I always think that any time you pull from yourself, not in an egotistical way, but just in an honest way, you're halfway there to making a real character. And then it's just about trying to figure out how does this flaw, how has it affected this character growing up? What's it made other people think of him? How has it made other people treat him? Does this flaw become worse because of the way people have treated this character? Is it self-perpetuating? So you can kind of go off on a whole bunch of tangents. I try to start simply and specifically about the flaw that's going to help me serve this plot and drive it forward and make for interesting twists and turns. And it's another thing, just not to go away from that subject, but specificity also is, I think, one of the most important things in writing. And so often it's missing. I think, people, beginning writers or writers who just don't work that hard, will describe things in vague ways or talk about emotions in general, vague ways. I miss my wife so much. She died 2 years ago. I miss her so much. This is sort of the simple example, as opposed to saying, when my wife came down in the morning, the first thing she did was, put the cup upside down on something specific that you really feel like you can almost see and hear and smell. And so that also plays into flaws and just something that's you can exhibit. The character can, because character is also, of course, all about behavior. And especially in films, in novels, you have the luxury of having this inner life that you can use words to describe. But in movies and TV, we're just limited by what we can see. We've got to just deal with what people are seeing. So you really have to explore and illustrate behavior, character through their behavior, what we're seeing them do, how they treat each other, what they do when they're alone. Are they different when they're alone and when they're with somebody else? How are they different with two different people? This are all little tricks you can use behaviorally to really set up who your character is and make them recognizable.
And in your characters' arcs, do they always, let's say a dark character, does it always turn themselves around, or no, there's just some sort of resolve, but they're still the same?
I think that the best drama, the characters all make a journey of some kind. I don't always feel like you have to do the network television version of it where, the bad guy has to see the evil of his way. It's not. I mean, people, a great example is, I think, is it Three Billboards in Ebbings?
Right.
And the character Sam Rockwell played was just a brilliant actor. That's a guy who makes a fantastic arc. And he starts off as this hateful racist. And in his relationship and dealings with Frances McDormand, he starts to come around a little bit and he ends up helping her. But by the end of the movie, you don't feel like this guy is going to go out now and go on a march. But he has regained a little bit of humanity, so you have some hope for him. And so to me, that's a perfect and an expertly done character arc for someone like that. Where if he suddenly became this touchy-feely, lovey guy, you wouldn't believe it and wouldn't honor the work that was done in setting up who this guy is. So, people, I don't think sadly, I think people don't tend to change very much. I think they change increments. And so you don't have to necessarily reflect that in drama because you want to give people something a little higher to aspire to. But I think you have to, any evolution of a character has to be true ultimately to who they really are and how they're going to manifest that change.
And in Frances McDormand's character in Three Billboards Out of Ebbing, Montana, how does she change?
Well, I certainly think that she becomes less angry. I think that particularly when Sam Rockwell helps her, and she starts to feel like she's not alone, I think she finds a way to deal with her pain, and you get the sense by the end of the movie that okay, she's probably going to be all right. She's going to learn how to live with this pain. It's always going to be there, but it's not going to just keep her stalled. And I think at the beginning of the movie, she is just stalled. She can't go forward. And so she's not going to be this happy-go-lucky person, but you do feel like, she has now maybe found another color in her life.
What do you think about people who write their personal stories, that they want to show themselves as a protagonist? A lot of people come to LA or they're somewhere in the Midwest or wherever. Hey, I've got this great screenplay idea. It's about my life. Is everybody ready to hear about their life as their first project?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing too because the old adage is write what you know. And so for beginning writers, oftentimes autobiographical experience is something that they know and they have the emotional connection to it. The problem is you still have to serve your audience. It's got to be entertaining. And it's got to have enough of a universal appeal. And when I say that, I don't mean that means it has to be homogenized, but there has to be enough things in it that people can connect with and recognize behavior-wise, like, okay, I'm going to go with you on the story. So whatever your story is, you've got to find a way to plug it into more of a universal consciousness so that it can be absorbed by people who don't know you, don't know your story, don't care about your story. But how does your story relate to something in my life? I don't know if I sound very pretentious saying all this, but
No, I don't think so.
I just think you should never think like my life is so fascinating that anyone would be willing to spend 2 hours of their life watching it. There might be great things that happen to you, but I think you should be really willing and able to just throw a lot of it away and concentrate on the core thing that you feel is the story you want to tell, this core thing, and then build around that, make stuff up, make it more interesting, make the stakes higher, bring in characters who are not real in your life, but so you can build something that might be a very good, well-crafted story, but also has enough personal resonance. Now, for instance, when for many years, I was doing movies for television, and I prided myself on, I wrote them and directed them. And I chose very carefully what I would do. I never took a movie for the money or because I was very careful about what I chose. If it was a book they wanted me to adapt, or oftentimes they would come to me with a failed script. And they said, look, we still want to there's an idea here we love. We want to make this movie. This script didn't work. Can you do something with this script? And I would take it over. But in any project that came to me, the first thing I had to know was, what's my emotional connection to this? Can I find one? And if I can't find it, I don't want to do it because now I don't feel like I can make it interesting. And a case in point is I did a movie back, it must be 1998, for TNT at the time, called The Hunley. And it was about the first submarine used in warfare during the Civil War. Fascinating story, just fascinating. But I wasn't so much into a war movie, which it was. I wanted to make it more of a character study, but I couldn't figure out what was driving this main character to get into this death trap, this tube that they all had to hand crank to go forward once they dived. What could this be? And I suddenly had this idea that he was in love with a woman who he left to go fight in the war, and she died while he was gone. And she drowned. And he's now obsessed with being reunited with her. And that's sort of his death wish now about going into the submarine, and he feels like this is his destiny in a way. And it's never spoken. I never told the executives about it, God forbid, because they would think, I'm making a whole other movie. But that now allowed me to inform all the writing and this character's drive through the movie with this kind of other thing that we revealed in just little pieces here and there, a little flashback here, a little thing here. And suddenly by the end of the movie, you start to realize, oh, of course, this is why this guy is like this, and he's driving so hard. And so that's just an example of how you can take a story that's outside yourself, but find a personal connection that allows you to really lose yourself in that story and make it more than what appears just on the surface.
How do you know when you have a movie idea as opposed to a television idea?
I don't think there's any difference now. That's a question I could have answered differently back in the 80s or 90s even. Now there's just there's really no difference because of streaming. I think, in fact, I think there's far more interesting work being done on the streaming services than in feature films. I think feature films right now, the state of the business is tentpole franchise, gigantic movies, which seem to be the only thing people are willing to leave their homes for. And I think that sort of like the directors, you think about, Mark Rydell and Sidney Lumet and Alan Pakula, those directors would be working for the streamers today because their movies would never be made. And no one wants to go see, Kramer versus Kramer. They'll watch that on Netflix. So, it's sad, of course, there's nothing like the movie experience, but I'm so grateful that the streamers are there because they don't have to get, unlike a broadcast network, they got to get 15 million people to watch a show to make it worth their while. And the streamers can be in a much different niche, and they don't have to. They've got the subscriber base, and so they can afford to appeal to a lot of different groups. And so, honestly, most of the ideas that I get, I don't think about them as movies. I think about them as something that might be on Amazon or Apple Plus or Netflix. Not that I don't, again, just love going to the movies because I'm addicted. I easily see 5 or 6 movies a week, probably 2 or 3 in a theater, and then the rest on, plus the television shows I'm watching, the great, Better Call Saul. You just can't beat this stuff. It's so well done. And in a way, it's very gratifying because I think that in the era that I came of age in television, where you had to, they pressured you to appeal to the lowest common denominator. And we filmmakers always said, but you don't have to do that. Trust the audience a little bit. And now I think that's coming to fruition because we are now in the television world or the streaming world, we're dealing with stories that no one ever make for television years ago. Would never even touch them. And there's an appetite for them. People show up for them. They want to see them. And I think that, again, a lot of the lowbrow stuff now is in the movie theater, not on TV.
Why do purpose and passion matter when choosing a screenplay?
Well, in a lot of different ways. In the most practical way, making a movie, and when I say movie, it applies to anything, TV movie, a TV show, whatever, just a movie. But it is difficult. It's hard. It's hard to get it made. If you're lucky enough to get it made, they're hard to make. It's a very, very difficult undertaking to make a movie. It's the greatest thing in the world, but it's hard. So you must have a high level of purpose and passion to bring you through this because you're going to get stepped on. You're going to, you're going to lose your money. You'll get the money back. You're going to. Here comes the rain. Oh no! There's so many things that happen during the shooting and everything else that will destroy you if you don't have a really good attitude and that overriding purpose. I must make this movie, and this passion for a story. I've got to tell this, and that passion is so key in selling your ideas. I can't emphasize that enough. If you go to pitch a TV show or you're going to a studio to pitch them a movie you want to make, you have got to be genuinely passionate about it. They've got to feel that. They've got to feel like, okay, if we say yes to this person, they're going to go out there and they're going to kill themselves to make this movie. I can tell. You know? Whereas if you come in there like you're too cool for school, and nobody wants to hear that. No, and it extends to all your collaborators. You're trying to get a certain actor. You're trying to get a certain artist to work on your film. They want to feel your passion for this thing. They want to know that you've got a vision and you're gonna get this thing done. So it's really crucial in every aspect of the process.
For every idea that you come up with, how many of them are what you consider bad ideas and you throw them away?
Well, I feel like I never really throw an idea away. An idea will either be just not ready yet, or it's not enough to be its own thing. I'm going to have to put this aside, and this might be a piece of something else later on. There's just tons of ideas that you work out in your head, and you think, is that something? Is that could I? And then when it comes to the point where now I can't make that gel, I just keep it somewhere in the back of my head, behind my left kidney somewhere, and I'll be 5 years later, I'll be working on something, and I'll just think, subplot, villain, And also, I must say, I've been making a lot of short films now. And so it's been a great treasure trove for me to go back to some of these ideas that I tried to develop as feature films or as TV series. And I never could really figure out a way to sustain them for 2 hours or for 5 years. But they're still good, solid little ideas. And I thought, this would be a great 10-minute little movie. And so I've had a lot of success in that way with just taking an idea from 15 years ago that now, and then if you modernize it and suddenly breathe new life into it. So it's not just the same thing. But ideas to me are gold, and I never really throw them away. They're always there.
So going back to your friend who, bless his heart, wanted to read these screenwriting books, but then said, well, what ideas do I come up with? Right. It sounds like for you, that's never been a problem. And in fact, there's so many. It's just how much time do I have?
Yeah, it is frustrating. There's so many things I want to do. I have an idea for a new novel, but that's an incredible undertaking. To write a novel, and scripts. I write scripts pretty quickly once I get the idea and I feel like it's formed. I can actually write the script pretty fast. But it's frustrating because a novel, I know I've got to devote a year to that, and it's hard to put everything else aside, to do that. But it's a strong idea, and I'm desperate to do it. So there's tons of ideas that, and that's also where the short films help me, because I can develop them quickly, execute them quickly, and see them done in front of an audience, fairly quickly. But and I guess it's a good thing ultimately, but it's frustrating that I just feel like I'll never be able to tell all those stories that I want to tell, because we only live so long.
Does it become easier to come up with good ideas the longer you're doing this, the longer you've been creative?
I don't think so. I don't think it gets easier or harder necessarily. The question always is, you get an idea, and then how to grow it. Is it really strong enough to sustain an audience's interest, to be worthy of an audience giving 2 hours of their time to watch it, or an hour, whatever it is, or 10 minutes in the case of my short films. But I don't think, to me, it's always been, the ideas come, but the forming of those ideas into a cohesive story is difficult, and always has been. I think probably for me always will be. I so envy the writers I know, showrunners I know, people like Stephen King, who seem to be able to just come up with an idea fully formed and just get out there and do it. And it's a much slower process for me, even though once the idea is formed, I can go very quickly. But it just takes a while for me to really get the depth I want and the complexity that I want in this story. And it's the most difficult part of writing for me, because it's really starting from nothing. And so I stand there at my desk, and it's like the blinking cursor, and I've got this basic idea, but now I've got to just create the beats, beat by beat by beat, and what's going to happen. And it's horrible for me. It's a horrible process. It takes me a really long time. And My friends like it because I tend to be in touch with them a lot because, oh, I haven't spoken to Bill in a while. I better call Bill, rather than actually concentrating on this work. But once I start to get the ideas and the ideas flow and I understand now, okay, this is what the story is. Here's the ending. Here's the 3 acts. Once that happens, then I can really kick into high gear. Then I really enjoy it because now I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm working with. It's like having the frame of a house done rather than looking at a blank air and trying to figure out how you're going to build this house and what's going to hold the wood up and what's going to hold the roof up. Now the frame is there, and now I can do the plumbing and electricity, and I can get the siding on and put the windows in. And then it's fun for me. Then I just go really fast. I write scripts really, really fast, the first drafts anyway. And then it takes a long time to rewrite them, as we spoke about earlier.
And you stand when you write?
I do, yes. I have a stand.
Like Hemingway?
Did he stand?
I thought he did, yeah.
Huh.
I thought he did, but maybe I'm wrong.
Ahead of his time.
Well, I mean, but you do get more energy standing.
Yeah.
Hence the standing desk. When you sit, it really, I don't know. I mean, there are times when, take a break and sit, but standing, you really, the blood's flowing. And
I've come to just love it, and I really rely on it now. And I find that if I'm really trying to puzzle out a plot hole or something really spongy that I can't get, I will sometimes sit. And in my office at home, I'm lucky enough to have this like window seat. And so I'll just go sit there for a little while and try to think it through. And then I'll get something and I'm back to the desk but standing gives me a lot more energy and I really, really like it.
I think you've said as a filmmaker, at times you've tended to feel a little bit in a vacuum with the creative process. Can you explain what that means?
I think it's always a bit of a danger to be, you get so caught up in the process of making a film and it consumes so much of your life, and your energy, and your relationships that you can become so focused on it that you're not open anymore to what's going on around it. And it's just a dangerous thing, and not only for the actual process of filmmaking, but just in your life as a filmmaker. And it's, again, something that this is the second time I've mentioned Los Angeles in maybe not the best way, so I don't mean to be piling up on Los Angeles, but during the time, like I've lived out here in various stages of my life, and what I've always felt at the times I've lived here is that the film business, show business, can just so easily take over all of your senses. It's everywhere you look. It's every billboard, everything you see around you. Everyone around you is writing a script. You go to Starbucks, there's 10,000 people there writing. In fact, years ago, one news station put a reporter in front of the Village Theater in Westwood, and everybody who walked by just said, "How's your script coming?" I'm like, everybody. Oh, my third act. So, everybody had an answer for that. So I do think that for me, the advantage of living in a place like New York is that I'm exposed, whether I like it or not, to every aspect of life, every other profession. Where I live in New York, my neighbor is an engineer, another neighbor is a lawyer, a guy down the block is a plumber. And they get a kick out of what I do, but they're not like overly impressed by it. It's just like, oh yeah, that's fun, that must be fun, I don't know. But it helps keep you grounded, I think, and out of that vacuum, because that's where creativity dies. And that's where I feel like you start to, in your storytelling, you start to reference things that are not real, things from show business or things from other movies or other TV. If you're not exposed enough to what's happening in life, you can be a little narrow, I think.
You had mentioned old Hollywood and your love for that. There's a book about how Marilyn Monroe left LA for a while and went to New York.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And so they put a wig on her, a dark wig. They put her on a plane. I guess I don't know if she was out of her contract or she wanted out, but so things weren't good in Hollywood, so she wanted to go to New York. And they took her to the closest place, which was Connecticut, which they thought was New York. But and so she stayed there, but then eventually made her way to New York City. And for a brief time, just felt very free and was able to, start working on projects. But then sadly came back to LA. But just wanted out of that same bubble.
Yeah, well, that's smart. It's a smart thing to do. And I think that's why many actors choose to live, if not in New York, but outside of Hollywood. Whatever that means today. But they go buy a ranch in Montana. They'll go, and I think that's helpful for their process to be in touch with real life and real people, especially for an actor. So I admire that. I do.
How has your screenwriting process evolved over the years?
It has pretty much stayed the same. I get the idea. I think about the idea. I don't start writing anything for a while. If something comes to me, I go, oh, I didn't think about that. And then I'll find myself in the shower thinking about it, or walking down the street thinking about it. I get another little idea. I get a lot of ideas when I'm driving and listening to music. I get a lot of inspiration. Suddenly out of nowhere, like, oh, wow, that's the thing. Yes, okay. So then eventually, when I feel like I have enough now to actually put something on paper, I'll open up a new document and I'll just, if I have a title for it, if I don't, it'll just be a new story. And I'll write down whatever it is I've been thinking about, just kind of spitball it. And then I'll start returning to that and just seeing how I can flesh that out. And ultimately try to get to a beginning, middle, and an end, just in the broadest strokes. Just sort of work that out. And then once I've got that, then I try actually writing an outline. So just like a scene-by-scene outline of what happens next and what happens. And from the initial page, I already know kind of where the midpoint is, and I know how I want it to end, but I don't know much else. So those little beats, help me. And those are the most difficult things to do, because you're just pulling stuff out of the air, just making stuff up, which is, I'm complaining about it, but that's my job, but it's the hardest part of it. And you're just trying to build the story and build the plot and build the characters, just piece by piece and scene by scene. And that could take me months to just keep working that and doing that. And then once I've got that outline done, I'll try to put it aside for a while, work on something else for a week or so, and then come back to it a little bit fresh. And I've had my wife read it and get her feedback. And then I just, once I feel like there's always this moment, and maybe one thing has changed over the years that I recognize it more clearly now, but there's a moment in the outline where you feel like, okay, I'm ready for the script now. I can't really spend any more time speculating about what's going to happen with this in the outline. I have to now go into the script and write the script. And then that's a great, exciting place to be. And then I just start writing the script, and I follow the outline. You take left turns, something else happens along the way, you get a different idea, the character wants to do something else, so you deviate from the outline. But basically, I try to just go straight through that process and write that script from beginning to end. And if I get a different idea about something that I realize could be a profound idea for the script, but it's going to mean reworking the whole first act, I'll just, again, open up another document and I'll put that idea there and then go on and just keep writing until I get to the end. And, for me, and people think, oh, you're so disciplined. But I think it's actually because I'm not disciplined. If I don't impose this to just go through, I'll just, what did I write last night? Oh, that's no good. I better rewrite that, and maybe there's something better at the beginning. And before you know it, you just got this jumble, you don't know what it is anymore. And that's exactly what I would do if I didn't force myself to go all the way through. And just because it works for me doesn't mean it worked for everybody else. People have different ways of writing. Some people depend on rewriting as they go. They can't do it any other way. They've got to look at what they did yesterday, rewrite that, get that perfect, or as perfect as they can. And that's absolutely valid. It works for them. But that wouldn't work for me.
We talked about Stephen King in the previous segment, maybe. Do you have an imaginary reader that you write for? He talked about that in On Writing. Some people are writing for someone that's been dead for 15 years and others, a harsh high school teacher,
It's usually my wife, Melissa.
Okay.
I want her to be impressed.
Nice.
So I really write with the idea often of she'll love this. She'll be impressed. She'll think I'm really smart because I've written this. And it's helpful. It's and then it's discouraging when I realize I failed. When she doesn't always react that way to everything I write. But I learn from that and go on to make it better.
And is there a particular style of music you listen to? You said while you're driving, you come up with great
Oh,
ideas.
well, when I'm driving, I love to listen to anything. I sing, and I just make a complete fool of myself when I'm driving. And I have a convertible, so it's even worse. You know, everyone can see me. There are kids pointing at me as they drive away. But I love it. I sing. I just get very involved in the music, and I love the music mostly of my era. You know, I love '70s music, and I love the classics from the '50s and '60s,
Rolling Stones.
and Rolling Stones, and Bruce Springsteen, who still is a force today, of course.
Sure.
So, I love the just emotional kind of stuff that I can get feelings out. When I'm writing, I listen to music also, but I tend to listen to film scores. And lyrics, because that would distract me. But that's enormously helpful to listen to music as I write. And I've got an enormous collection of scores that I listen to.
So Lou Reed driving down the street, and then
Ennio Morricone when I'm writing.
Okay. How does a writer create conflict?
Boy, that's a great question, and it's an important one because that is really the central thing about drama. I think is conflict, and it doesn't have to be people in major fisticuffs. Conflict used to be anything where someone disagrees with you. A scene where two characters agree on everything is dull. Nobody wants to watch that. So it is important, I think, even in the most innocuous seeming scene, to have some sort of conflict. It's just what I want is at odds with what you want, and how we're going to resolve that. And again, I always just draw on my personal stuff, what things that drive me crazy. If it's not something overtly obvious from the story, this is a bad guy, here's the villain, we know what that conflict is. But just when two characters are in a scene, and it's just something as simple as the way they eat something differently. One thing, it annoys the other person. You crunch so loud, I can't stand. Just the little things in life, and we talked about before, specificity. That made people feel like I recognize that. Yes, that's like my wife. My husband does that. So again, it's just about being observant and looking around you and watching what people do and what drives them crazy.
What is meaningful conflict and what isn't?
I think for it to be meaningful, it has to be true to who the people are. It's got to be something that comes from their personalities, something that comes from their needs. As opposed to something, I can't think of an example, but if you try to impose a false conflict on two people because you want them to fight or you want them to be at odds with each other, but if it's not something that's true to who they are, then the audience they may not know why they're disconnecting, but they just sort of disconnect. Doesn't feel real. Doesn't feel like this is germane to the relationship or who these people are. It just feels false or can feel false.
If conflict were a graph, let's say, in a screenplay, would there be levels, maybe small starting out, but then almost like a roller coaster?
Absolutely. Anything in a screenplay has to have peaks and valleys. It just can't be one thing all the way through. Even if it's an action movie, it can't be action all the time. There has to be a break. It has to be, a comedy can't be just wall-to-wall laughs because you get numb to it after a while. The audience just gets numb. And so I feel like you really have to balance. It's a balancing act of, we're going to build up to this, and then we're going to take a breath and come down, and then build to this, and that's across all the emotions really in a script.
What's your process for discovering the emotional core of a story?
For me, it's just really as simple as, do I feel it? Is this a story I want to tell because I feel something about it? That it reverberates, in me somewhere. But there's really not a process per se that I use to come to that or determine that, or it's just about emotion and do I feel it or not? It's kind of, luckily, I guess, simple.
And so when you're writing dialogue, do you come back in and do that separately? Do you just kind of get the structure of the scene?
No, I usually do it at the same time. Sometimes, though, I'll, because I love dialogue. I love writing dialogue. I love listening to these characters and making them really different from each other and how they. But sometimes, if I'm really on a roll with a scene, and I don't want to stop to think about a technical thing about where we are in the scene, or the characters moving, are they sitting, are they leaving, I'll just write the dialogue like a play. I'll just go through the scene and finish the scene with the dialogue. And then I'll go back and figure out where we are. He's moving to here, and we're making dinner. Whatever that is. So it doesn't seem like a play. But sometimes dialogue, it just goes, and I just have to catch up with it, keep up with it.
And do you feel those that's when the characters are pushing back and they're taking a life of their own?
A lot of times in the dialogue and in the behavior, I'll write something for the character, and it's like, wow, it doesn't sound right. It's not really true. This does not sound like this character talking. And I'll have to think about that. I'll try again. I'll try a different word, different thing. It's still fighting me. Then I'll have to think about, okay, so maybe this character doesn't want to be saying this, doesn't want to be doing this in the scene. So what's the opposite of it? What maybe that's what we have to look at. And the same thing with behavior. I'll have a character doing something that reveals who they are, but it feels false. It's not coming. I can't get the idea. And that's when I know I can't force it. I can't, pry it in there. I have to go back and try to figure out what's missing is there. And opposites are a great writing tool. So what's the exact opposite of this? And there's not always the answer, but it helps you sometimes get to an answer.
The TV show Ghost Whisperer, you were the show creator?
Well, here's how that show came about. I had been doing a lot of movies for CBS at that time, and I had no interest in TV series. I didn't want to direct episodes. I didn't have disdain for it. It just wasn't something I was interested in. I just liked the idea of the same characters all the time. So I always avoided it. And there was an executive who I liked very much named Bella Bajaria at CBS. And she called me one day and said that she had just met this woman. And I think she met her through James Van Praagh, the famous psychic. And this woman had been brought to LA because her talent is that she can make ghosts who are haunting you go away. She can see them if they're earthbound, and she can convince them to cross over. And so there were people at CBS who were having problems that they felt were being caused by ghosts in their house. And when James told them about this woman, Mary Ann, who lived in Ohio, they brought her in. And apparently it was very successful. She immediately identified who their ghosts were and got rid of them. So Bella called me and said, look, whether you believe any of this or not, I think there might be a series here. There might be something about this woman, and you should meet her. And so I was in LA, and Mary Ann was, because she had cleared their houses. So I did. I'll be happy to meet her. And we met at a Starbucks in Studio City. And I walk in, and I'm expecting to see some like ethereal-looking person, but instead is this very solid, down-to-earth, just salt-of-the-earth kind of woman, and with her husband, who was an ex-Marine, buzz cut, tattoos, And I sat there and talked with them, and she was so wonderful and kind and funny and good-hearted, and wasn't full of herself. Didn't feel like she had the answers to all the world's problems. Her thing is she grew up being able to see ghosts, and she learned how to make them go away. And so I really became fascinated by this because, of course, I love horror. I love Gothic horror. And so I asked her, I said, well, so you just see ghosts all the time? And she said, yeah, I can't turn it off. She said, I try not to let them sometimes know that I see them because then they bother me. So they want something from me. So I said, well, how about right now? And so, yeah, there's 3 ghosts right here in the Starbucks. And she explained to me, that guy over there, I think it's probably his mother. She's looking at him. She doesn't seem to be very approving. And this person over here, I think it might be his son. And it was kind of really, like the hair on my neck kind of went up a little bit. And that scene, by the way, is in the pilot of the show. And so I drove away thinking, wow, so, Gothic horror, ghost stories with character-driven drama. I thought this could be a great way to meld those 2 passions of mine. And so I called the executive back. I said, yeah, I'd love to write this pilot, and who knows. And so we made a deal, and I wrote the pilot. And I thought, I'll write this, and then I'll go on back to my regular life making movies because, what's the chance of a pilot being made? And I've never written a pilot that'll be very interesting. So I wrote the pilot, and they really liked the pilot, and they said, let's shoot it. I said, okay, wow. So, well, I've never made a pilot. It'll be fun to do a pilot. It'll never go to series because the mortality rate is huge in these things. So I shot the pilot, and they said, okay, we like this pilot. Let's do 13 episodes. And then I really got panicky. I thought, my God, I have to do this 13 more times, come up with stories. How can I do this? But we did it, and we got a great writing staff together, and Mary Ann was very helpful. She a consultant on a lot of things. And it was an opportunity for me to really deal with all my fears about death and grief and loss. And that's how I approached the show. It was my chance to work through all my issues about this stuff. And at the same time, to try to treat death in a way that could maybe give somebody some hope. Maybe there is something a little more than we know out there. And so I got really turned on by it. And that's, then little did I know I would spend the next 5 years of my life basically making that show. And it was a wonderful experience. We had a great cast. There was, everyone got along. There was no drama behind the camera. It was just a really wonderful experience. And I loved it as a filmmaker because of the speed. I would get an idea, go home, write it, and I could literally see it on the air in 4 weeks. And, it was a hit show. A lot of people watched it, and we got a lot of amazing and very moving feedback from people. And it was just a tremendous experience. And we did one episode because I was trying to work out my fear of flying. Oh, I still don't quite get flight. I don't understand how we can sit in this kerosene-filled tube and hurtle through space at 600 miles an hour, and somehow we know where we're going and we land in this exact spot, 5 hours later. I just don't get how that works or why it works. And so every time I'm in a plane, I think at some point, God is going to look down and say, what do you think they're doing? They can't do that. So I fly all the time, as we have to, but I'm terrified of it. So I did an episode where a plane crashed in their town, and Melinda comes out of her store and sees this billowing smoke, from where the crash was, and then coming up the street are 150 ghosts who just came off this plane. And so it was a double episode that we did, and it was fantastic for me in every way, because I could through the other characters, I could deal with not only the fear of flying, but this whole idea of mass loss and grieving and how do you let it go and all that stuff. And so they were very successful episodes. I'm still afraid of flying, but it was a good example of why I love working on that show. I could just work out so much of this stuff.
Were there certain areas that she couldn't go into because it was just too many ghosts and it was too tragic for her?
Not really. I mean, there were moments where she felt the heaviness of tragedy and, she'd be depressed. I'm talking about the real Marianne. Yeah. And, but for the most part, and there was, when she actually crossed somebody over, there was really she did it all sort of mentally. She would just kind of go into this, she would just be quiet, and she's communicating with this ghost mentally, and she'd say, okay, he's gone. What? So on the show, of course, we had to kind of pretty that up a bit. We had to have we never did the light or anything, but we always did interesting ways for people to cross over and look magical and fun, and sometimes scary. But it was just that's one of the highlights of my life doing that show.
Is it still available for people to watch? I know the series is no longer.
It is. It's on Hulu, I think. It's all over, and it's playing all over the world. I mean, there's never a moment where it's not playing somewhere. It's amazing. It's like 127 different countries. People really loved it, and I think that the reason it struck a chord is not because it's such a brilliant show or it's not art, but I think that after 9/11. We came on in 2005, so we weren't that far out. But I really think there was a hunger out there for hope and to try to find some way to believe that there's more beyond, that there's maybe, I think it just gave people an appetite for wanting to believe that there's just more than just what we're seeing here. And I really think that's what struck. Certainly a lot of the letters we got spoke to that. It was pretty great.
Can you take us into the writer's room for Ghost Whisperer? So how would you structure different episodes? How would the writers work with each other?
Well, that's an interesting question because I never quite got comfortable in the writer's room environment. It was one of my, you could probably say one of my failings as a showrunner, I suppose. But having been a solitary writer for 25 years of my career at the time I started that show, it suddenly became really difficult to sit in a room. And we had a great staff, smart. We had playwrights. We had really smart people in that room. And to be able to instantly identify ideas, that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad, that's good. I found it really difficult because I just kind of, I'm used to the page and the keyboard and thinking through everything, not necessarily slowly, but on my own, without anybody watching the process, or being asked to deliver an instant verdict on something. So I found it really difficult. I listened to someone's idea. Wow, that's great. That's a great idea. And somebody else had it. That's even better. Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. And I'd be confused. I wouldn't. I would always have to take all the stuff and go back to my desk and try to make my own sense of it. So after a while, what we did was we would convene in the writers' room at the beginning of the season and lay out basic, big things we wanted to do. In terms of themes and also just story arcs and where we're going to bring this character through by the end of the season, what we want them to be here. And then when we started getting comfortable enough that we had scripts to start writing, we would just go back to our own offices and start writing. And then basically I would then work with the writers one-on-one, which I was much more comfortable with than being in the atmosphere of a free-for-all kind of room. And the network would get upset about this. They were like, "Well, it's not the way we do it. Well, this is the way I do it, and it seems to be working." And the writers seem to like it. They seem to like having the one-on-one attention. And if they collectively came up with a problem or something to solve, they were free to convene the room without me if I wasn't there, if I might have been directing or something. And then they could call on the power of the room to solve a thorny plot problem. But pretty much I worked. Kind of one-on-one. And then in the third season, I was getting a little bit anxious to move on. I felt like it got to the point where I would be on a set and I could no longer think of a different way to shoot the set. I've been in this kitchen now, how many times? So I was anxious to try to do different things, although I still love the show. So we brought in a great showrunner named P.K. Simmons. And he and I worked together in season 3. And then he took over in season 4 and 5. And I had the great opportunity then of just writing and directing a couple of episodes a season. They would just say, which one do you want to do? Okay, I'm going to do these. And that was really great because I was free then of the note sessions from the network. And, I could just be a filmmaker and make these movies and then develop other things I wanted to develop. And PK took the show in really interesting directions and it continued to do really well in the ratings. And, the transition was pretty seamless. And so, it was a 5-year run and it changed my life in many ways. And, the profits from that show helped me make my short films, which I'm really grateful for. And I've made friendships on the show that, to this day I still maintain. And, it was a very golden time as a filmmaker who loves the process of being on the set. I love directing. I love working with the actors and the crew. I love the cameras. I love everything about it. So to be able to do it so often, was just so great. Because, TV, we were making 22 of these a year, 22 hours a year. So I could be directing a bunch of them. It's a great experience, lots of fun.
But then in terms of the writing, it sounds like because you were used to being a solitary writer, standing at a desk or whatever your process was, I think that would be difficult for a lot of people, a room with many different agendas, even if everything's harmonious, just to have so much going on.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but so the democracy of it threw me. Because, as a solitary writer, you're just used to you get your own ideas, you vet them, you throw them out, you accept them. But now you suddenly have to learn how to accept new ideas. And for a series, it's really important. You can't be just one person's vision, really, to make a good series. You need people who can bring different skill sets to the table. And we had that on Ghost Whisperer, and I feel like we made good use of that, even though we had a rather unusual structure. Though when PK came in, he had grown up in the room system. And so for season 3, 4, and 5, we had the room. And everybody, was great with it. And the room is also a trap because you've got a room full of 8 really bright people. And, you start telling stories and it's funny. And, half a day goes by and your sides hurt from laughing so much. But oops, we didn't really solve episode 3, did we? So there was a lot of that too.
And a lot of great food, I'm sure, too.
Yes, too much food, really difficult. And we were at Universal. And, what's crazy about Universal is that the tram, the tourist tour, and I can tell all you tourists, they do go through everywhere where movies are really being made. Because we would just have to watch, right outside the writer's room, the tram would go by, and here's the famous room where all these TV shows are written. Yeah. So one of our writers, Catherine Butterfield, developed tram theater, where they'd be bored, and they would, when they saw a tram coming, they'd go outside on the little sidewalk outside our writer's room, and they would start arguing with each other. They start a fight. They start, it's something to give the tram people something to look at when they walk by. So, the highlight of their day was tram theater. So this is the kind of thing that could happen in the room.
Did every episode of Ghost Whisperer have the same structure?
Yes. That was, one thing about CBS. And again, it's a funny story because when I sold, even though they came to me with this notion, I had to fashion a pitch and I had to go back to them and say, okay, here's how I would do this show. And they said, great, do it. And one of the top executives said to me was, what we love about your pitch is that it's not like anything else we have on the air. And I said, great. And then we started the development process, during which they made it as much as possible like every other show they had on the air. It was just funny. It's like they can't help themselves. It's like this knee-jerk reaction. However, having said that, you also have to respect the fact that at least then, I'm not sure about now, but then CBS was the top network. They were knocking it out of the park. So you can't argue with that kind of success. Someone somewhere knows what they're doing. So I try to have a good attitude about it, and I want to have a successful show. So I took their notes, and we tried to make them as much as possible doable and not violate what we felt the show could stand for. And we would push back sometimes, and they'd back off. If we made a good argument for them, they weren't just dictatorial about it. But it was kind of interesting how it became more of a procedural about how to solve a mystery every week. And that's a CBS brand, really, is every show they do, whether it's CSI, whatever it is, it's a procedural. So that was the biggest kind of template that they imposed on it, was that we had to stick to this thing. But I tried to encourage them to let us do some serialization, where we could have a character who shows up in this episode, and then again 4 episodes later, and continue their story over an arc of episodes. And they resisted that at first. Nope, we want close-ended episodes. We don't want a situation where someone watches episode 5 and they didn't see episode 2 or 3, and we want them to feel they've missed nothing. We want to know that they're watching this and they can just pick up where they left off. I said, yes, I get that, but it's dull. So can we just, for those who might want something a little more, can we add a little thing in here? And they finally started letting us do it, just little by little. We would bring in these characters who were either ghosts or represented the dark side of ghosts, and it became more interesting for all of us then to make the show, because we had a little more going on than just a simple story that had to be solved, in 40 minutes every week.
Did viewer feedback factor in to different things in the story?
I don't remember ever having that happen. We got a lot of great touching. We got a letter once from a gravedigger, and this guy was saying how he sees this grief all the time at cemeteries, and he's just this invisible person. No one really pays attention to the gravedigger. But I always wanted to do an episode like that, and I'm not sure why we never did, but it was a very moving letter, and he was talking about how much he loved the show and how much it meant to him emotionally, and it helped him deal more positively with some of the things that he saw just in his job every day. Kids weeping, and so we got a lot of moving. We got another letter once from an older man, and he was saying how much he loved watching the show with his wife, and he would hold her hand throughout the whole show. But as the letter went on, it became clear that his wife was dead and not with him anymore. And so we had this, so we get these letters that would just give us goosebumps, and we love. However, the things that did affect oftentimes, which was never fun for us, CBS would often have a knee-jerk reaction to something that would happen on one of their other shows. So, for instance, if a character behaved in a certain way in an episode of The Mentalist or something else that was on then, and the ratings dropped a fraction of a point during that scene, they come back and say, okay, no, in your show, your next episode, you got someone doing this, can't do that. We dropped on that one, we can't do it. And be like, come on, But we'd have to respect that and do that, And I always felt that was a little bit, and I envied shows that had enough episodes in the can where they had enough lead time so they couldn't really respond that quickly. But we oftentimes were only a couple of weeks ahead of airing while we were shooting. So, that was the only thing that outside influence that really affected sometimes the direction of our show.
So policies across the board. So if saying a certain word or whatever scenario lost the audience or offended them in some ways.
Right. Just kind of knee-jerk panic thing of like, oh, can't do that. Yeah. And there's another process too. We have focus groups, which I think is probably responsible for more dull television than any other single thing. And you have to sit there and you're in this room behind a mirror and they've got a test audience and already you're in trouble because the test audience, they're from LA, half of them are already in the business, they don't want to admit it, it's crazy. And so they've got a dial and all they have to do is when they like something, turn the dial this way, when they don't like it, turn it that way. So we'd have a scene in the pilot where the two main characters were arguing, important scene, conflict, arguing, and they don't like it because it's an argument and these people love each other. They shouldn't be fighting. But you got to have it. It's going to be okay. They're going to make up. It's going to be all right. But that feedback would say, oh, no, you can't have conflict. People don't, it turns them off. They don't like it. They're going to turn the TV, they're going to turn something else on. So we often had to fight to keep conflict in the show. In fact, if I may, even go a little deeper, in the pilot script originally, the way I had written it was that Melinda, the lead, was about to get married, and she had not yet told her husband that she can see ghosts. And so on the eve of her wedding, she was really in tremendous anguish about how to do this. And she talked at length with his brother, her brother-in-law, about what to do and how to do it and the best way to approach it, And the way she finally broke it to him was she said to him, I was talking to your brother last night. And he says, my brother's been dead for 5 years. And that's how and the network said, no, we don't want, she can't keep him in the dark. It's not good. The audience won't like it. It's too much conflict. And I was heartbroken. It's like, you gotta be kidding me. What a great dilemma for this character. So we have to have it that he knew from the beginning. He approved of it. He was fine with it. Yeah, so I still managed to get the brother in there, but that was the kind of thing that was difficult to hear and to execute. And again, you have to say to yourself, they're successful. They know their audience. We'll give it a try. But ultimately, as they trusted us more, we could push back a little more against their notes. And when they saw the results of the shows, and they were happy with the show, and the shows were doing well, then they did lean back a little bit and not be quite as drastic with their thoughts.
What are the best ways for directors and actors to unpack a screenplay?
The first thing is that you want to meet and talk with the actor as a director, and before you cast them, hopefully, and I'm talking about in terms of like stars who are going to be made an offer. You're not going to get a chance to necessarily audition them, but if you're dealing with a name sort of actor, you want to make sure you can sit and talk with them and just know you're going to make the same movie, because it's really a bummer when you get on the set and you realize this actor sees a whole other movie, and you may not win that battle because they are oftentimes more important to the studio than the directors are. So it's important to have the dialogue going and just be sure, like, we see this movie the same way and we feel its character the same way. So that, that's an important thing. And most good actors will do their own breakdowns. Used to be like, well, years ago when I was getting started, I used to write biographies for every character I'd written, way into their childhoods, what formed them. I would spend weeks and weeks and weeks doing this. And I would give them to the actor, and I would say, look, this is not a Bible. This is just something for you to reference, and if there's something you want to use, great. If not, throw it away. And usually they were grateful. Sometimes they were like, yeah, okay. But I've learned now that good actors will do that already, and they want to bring their own thing to this character's backstory. They don't necessarily want my take, the writer's take, or the director's take. They want to find their own way into this character, the same way I have to find my own way into a story. So unless it's something really critical about that backstory that informs, an important behavioral point in the movie, I don't do that anymore because I know they're gonna fill in those blanks for themselves. And I think really it's just about discussion most of all. I do rehearse, but for me, a valid rehearsal is just as much just sitting over dinner and just talking about where we think this character has been and what we think they want, all those things as a writer you do, where the character's going. And we just sort of discuss different approaches. And so hopefully by the time you start shooting, you have answered each other's questions about the direction of this character, how this character is going to come to life on screen. And so, from there, I don't tend to do heavy blocking rehearsals like Sidney Lumet famously rehearses for 2 weeks like a play, marks out the locations, the props, furniture, and he has the actors go through every scene, start to finish like a play. And that works great for him, and obviously, Sidney Lumet movies are fantastic. I don't want to pin it down that much. And also, I've rarely had the luxury of time. I mean, I'm trying to make it sound like I've made a choice about the rehearsal, but really it's mostly because I only get a couple of days tops, and I want to rehearse with I don't really do that. We do like a table read with everybody, but then I want to break them up into groups, and just kind of work more intimately with them. And so, a lot of it's discussion and how to, what the big moments are in the script. I like to talk about the scenes with the actors, and I like to ask them questions. I like to, instead of coming in and saying, well, here's what I think about this character, I think this guy, I like to say, well, what do you think you're after in this scene? And I like to say, what do you think is the most important thing you say in this scene? And I learn a lot from that because oftentimes it's not what I think at all, but it's better than what I thought, or just different in a way that I can say, oh, hey, this is where he's going to go with that. That's great. So I tend to now just be much more interested in what the actor feels about it, and what their take is on where a scene is going to go, and just getting off the topic of your question for a bit, but just in terms of casting, it's so important because of this process to cast that right actor, and the old joke, it's 50% director's job, whatever it is, but it's like 90% of the director's job. Get that right actor in that role, because it's not my job as a director to teach someone how to act or to teach them how to be in this role. They got to come with their game, and they're gonna play to win. And so you've got to be sure that actor sees it the way you do and is going to give you what the role needs. Because if not, you really can't reasonably expect the actor to completely. Okay, no, I need you. This is all wrong. You got to come at this from a completely different direction. That's rarely going to work. Most actors are just not going to respond to that, and so you're sort of stuck with what their interpretation is. So, casting, most important thing in the world to do.
And with this backstory that you would prepare, it sounds like a lot of it, maybe the audience wasn't even privy to some of what it was.
None of it. It's really just about giving the actor a sense of their own context. But I don't do it anymore, like I said, because it's just the actors kind of do it for themselves, and I don't want them to feel like I'm imposing this idea on them. If they need something from me, they know they can come to me and say, "What do you think, Keith?" And that's great. But for the most part, I trust them to figure their characters out.
What's your process for reading a screenplay that someone else wrote?
I try to imagine myself as the viewer. I try just to clear my mind of all the things that I know about how movies are made and just try to concentrate on the story and the characters. I usually have to read a script twice to really get it. And if I choose to do it, then many more times. But sometimes I'm more able to find flaws in other people's scripts than in my own. So I can, if a friend of mine gives me a script to read, I can give him fantastic notes and feedback, but I can't do it on my own script. I have to have somebody else look at it and tell me where I've gone wrong. This strange blindness that you get.
What's the wrong way for a director to read a screenplay?
I guess, there's probably a couple of wrong ways, but the first wrong way is to read it like a person in the film business. You want to try to read it like an audience, which is difficult because it's got nomenclature and technology and words and technical stuff in it that doesn't make it feel like it's a reader-friendly experience. But the challenge, I think, is to try to just forget everything you know and read this thing and just have a visceral, emotional reaction to it. Do I feel for these characters? Do I want to tell the story? Do I want to find out what happens after this is over? Those are the kinds of correct things, to bring to it. So I guess the incorrect things are, just if you're too conscious of the process, that's a big scene, man. How am I going to do that? That's like 1,000 extras. Are they going to give me the money to do that? I'm going to need a crane here. That's for later. You just want to try to, do I connect with this on any kind of human level? Do I care about these people?
So then the latter is how someone in the industry an industry read would go, instead of, for lack of a better term, I realize this sounds very woo-woo, but a heart read.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, that's a good way to put it. That's, it really is. You hope. When I write a script, I use very few technical terms. I make it very spare. My paragraphs are no more than 4 lines each. And I never, when I open up a script and I see a paragraph this long, oh God, it's like dense, it's hard to read. So I try to make everything spare, reader friendly. And I try to be careful not to ever describe something that can't be photographed. I don't like to say, this character walks in the room and she feels totally out of place. What does that mean? What's the behavior that tells us she feels totally out of place? Is she checking herself in the mirror a little bit? That's the kind of thing I want to put in my script and not just leave for a director to figure out. Like how the director's going to be me, so I especially don't want to have to figure that out. So that's what I always tell writers. Just don't write something you can't photograph. And so hopefully, if someone reads my script, they're not going to be too bogged down in shots and all the technical stuff that gets in the way of the storytelling in that format.
What is subtext?
Well, subtext is critical also to writing and acting, but it's really what's not spoken. It's what's really happening in the scene, what someone's really feeling, thinking, but they're saying something else, or covering it up. And, really, as a director, you're trying to direct the subtext in a scene. So it's about identifying what that subtext is, and that's what the actors are playing, and the words they're saying almost not that they're superfluous, but that's not really what's going on in the scene. What they're saying, it's what they're thinking and feeling underneath. In fact, if I may digress a little bit, I just did a short film last year in Paris, a little spy thriller, a lot of fun, and I wanted to shoot it in French because I just didn't want to have French people speaking English with accents. It'd be ridiculous. So we were going to subtitle it and shoot it in French. I don't speak French. So I had to learn a little bit of it phonetically just so I could kind of recognize the words. My French producer, of course, was bilingual, so he would help me when the actors strayed. But the truth is, it didn't matter because I wasn't directing the words. I was directing what they were, their behavior, and what was behind those words. And that's why I was able to pull it off because I just wasn't worried about that and the fact that there wasn't that much dialogue. So it really is important to know what the character's intentions are in a scene, how they're being thwarted, what's going on underneath everything. That's subtext.
So even if you turn the sound down, you could still kind of feel it from the body language?
Ideally, in fact, I like to do an exercise with students from time to time. When I sometimes do classes on working with actors and directing actors. And I get a sample scene of two characters having lunch. And I have them memorize the scene. I don't give them any notes, but I said, memorize the scene, so when you come in tomorrow, you're off book and ready to do it. And so they come into the class, and we confirm we've never spoken about the scene, we haven't talked about it, nothing. So I have them just play the scene first with no direction at all whatsoever. And it's like a 5-minute scene. Then I'll say, okay, so here now, you were late for this lunch again. And the scene partner, you are so fed up with this person being late that you want to just kill them. You feel disrespected, you feel, And you, on the other hand, you feel like this person was judging you. And so we didn't change a word of dialogue, or nothing else at all. And they came in and played this scene again, completely different scene. And we kept doing that with four or five different permutations on what's the subtext of the scene is. And it was a great way to illustrate for these students that, wow, it really is about the subtlety, the nuance of behavior, the body language, and you can add a different meaning to any scene.
And do you let the other party know, the other actor know the intention, or do you do it in secret?
Well, it's a good idea to do that. In this case, I let them both know because it was instructive for the students. I wanted them to hear it. But I have had moments when I've been directing where I've held something back from one actor and given the information to another actor, not in anything that's damaging or menacing or anything like that. And there are other times where I've had two stars in a scene, and I felt like the one star was a little bit intimidated by this slightly bigger star he was in the scene with. And I could just tell in the scene that he was cowering just a little bit, and that wasn't really true for his character. His character had to stand up to this guy. And so I just took him aside, between takes, and I just said, don't let him take the scene away from you. And he instantly got it, and then it was great. Then it was like fire. Because, and so now they're kind of, they're really in the scene together. So sometimes, withholding a little bit and giving extra information to somebody else can be helpful.
What if a scene doesn't have any subtext?
Then it's not a scene. It's not shootable. It's not actable. And you at least have to be able to put a subtext in it, And I can't even imagine a scene. A writer could have written a scene without subtext because they just are unconscious or just working on a very surface level. But any director or actor can take a scene and insert subtext. It's the simplest thing in the world. What just happened to me right before I entered the scene? What am I worried about? I've got a pain in my rib that I'm really worried about, and I'm afraid to go to the doctor about it. These are things that are never spoken in the scene, but they're going to inform how the scene is played. So there's always got to be subtext. No such thing as no subtext.
And even if it's just one actor in a room and no one else enters that room?
Yeah, it's still about what's really going on with this person. What do they really want?
How does the director help an actor convey subtext? So if I'm an actor in a scene and maybe it's another, someone's late and they're always late, maybe it's my sister and they've always gotten away with being irresponsible and I've always had to be the responsible one. How are you helping me convey subtext to this late sister she's not there and I'm mad, we've got reservations, I've got to be back at work?
Right. It's really about body language, and I feel like it's dangerous for me to try to give them a specific thing to do, a behavioral thing to do, because I don't want them to indicate, I don't want them to feel like they're going to imitate me. The same reason why I would never give a line reading unless I'm asked for it, and oftentimes an actor will ask me, just tell me, how do you hear it? But other than that, I would never give a line reading. And I'm very hesitant to give too much of a specific behavioral thing, but I just try to make it attitudinal. How do you feel when this happens? The last time this happened, how does it make you feel? And I just try to get them to summon their own feeling, not to try to give them one, but to try to just have them summon their own experience. I mean, everyone knows what it's like to be annoyed, you know. So I just try to encourage them to bring it from within, just like I would a writer or anyone else.
So yeah, so you'd be more asking me as the actor, how is this making you feel, instead of like telling me the tone.
Right. I would just say, you know, this is the third time. This is the third time this week this has happened. You know, I don't know. I don't think she respects you. You know, and that usually will,
Sure.
give some sort of honest. You know, so instead of me saying, "Look, tap your foot, look at your watch," you know, that's you know, nobody wants to hear that. You know,
Sure. And no one wants to walk into a lunch like that either.
Right.
So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is it a director's job to make an actor feel safe?
Yes, probably the most important job of anything a director does, because the actor is, to some extent, putting themselves in your hands, because you're the judge. You're watching what they're doing, and you have to be careful not to let them look bad. So you want them to not feel, because the problem is that if an actor develops a distrust for the director, and they feel like they've got to direct themselves, it's problematic, because now the feeling is that maybe I don't want to take a chance. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be too big here, because I can't trust this person to tell me if I'm being too big. And so now you get a guarded performance that's not real, not true. So you want to try, and in some ways with actors you're just meeting, you can only do it by virtue of working together and trying, like, proving it. But you do want to make them feel like, look, I will not let you look bad, and you're safe, and I want you to try. Give me everything. Just don't be afraid. And together we'll find the right tone and the right way to do it. So it's about building trust. It's the most important thing.
What do you think they're afraid of looking bad at? They're overacting?
I think overacting or underacting, or just, because you always have, as a director, I think you always have to remember that it's the actor's ass that's out there. You know, that actor's on that screen. They're being judged. People in the audience not saying, "Gee, that director, I don't know. You know, I think he gave him a bad piece of advice there." They'll just look at the actor and they're responding. That actor is making me feel I believe him or her, or I don't. So that's a heavy responsibility for an actor to carry. It's scary, frightening. That's why I think they're so brave. So they're going to go out there in this tightrope, and they got to be sure that you're going to be able to tell them when they're stepping a little bit too far, too far to the left, and they're going to fall. Because I can't imagine a more bitter experience for an actor than to watch themselves on screen and think, "Oh my God, look how big I was there," and the director didn't catch it. And now I look like an idiot, because you can't always know if you're an actor, if it's too big or too small, or it's a missed out opportunity. So it's a big responsibility for a director. It's a scary responsibility. But it's why one reason I love working with actors I've worked with before. It's great. People I have a relationship with, and we trust each other. We know each other. We have that shorthand. It's a really nice feeling.
You think a lot of newer actors are afraid to look too big? I like how you said that. Go big, like, don't let them take this scene away from you. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you always have to be careful, just about, because the camera is, the camera sees things more clearly than the naked eye, and close up. And I remember we were discussing Carl Malden, earlier today. Actually, what a wonderful guy he was, what a great actor, kind of underrated, even though he's an Oscar winner, but he's an underrated actor. And I did a movie with him, and it was a feature film, and it was shot on film. And so I'm doing his close-up, and I'm watching, and I just wasn't sure he was getting there. I was nervous. And I was only like 26 or whatever at the time. And so I didn't quite have the courage to say to Carl Malden, Oscar winner, Elia Kazan working, actor, "Hey, Carl, could you be a little..." So I just kind of let it go. I thought, okay, if this doesn't work in the dailies, I'm going to try to find a way to reshoot this tomorrow, and I'll just have to broach it with him. But when I saw the dailies, it was a whole different performance. What was happening in his eyes and the little thing in his mouth, and he had a mastery of his instrument, and it wasn't visible on the street to the naked eye of me standing there 3 feet behind the camera. But on the screen, I saw, and I was so glad I didn't say, Carl, could you make that a little, I would have given myself away as a, novice, which of course no one suspected otherwise anyway. But it was a great lesson that film actors, especially experienced great film actors, know exactly how to modulate their performance depending on where the camera is. And sometimes you can see it with the naked eye, sometimes you can't.
What do you think about actors giving you a different performance each take?
It's a healthy thing. I think it's as long as you've gotten the performance that you need. That it gets troublesome if you still haven't gotten what you really felt the scene needs, and now we're trying something different. But I think in the right circumstances, it's great to have it in the cutting room. And sometimes they'll come up with something that was like, wow, And oftentimes with actors, I'll just sort of, if I feel like they have this gift, once we get a take I like and I'm printing it and I'm ready to move on, sometimes they'll just say, let's just try one more and go nuts. Let's see what happens. And most actors love that. Some don't, but most do. And you get something that could be just amazing or not, but it's worth going for. And you have the safety of knowing you have what you need. There's a moment where it gets abusive in that the actor never wants to move on. I haven't really had that experience. I've seen other directors have it. And it's a little bit of a nightmare where you feel like, okay, 55 takes and, I don't want to direct this in the cutting room. I'm directing it here. So, that's sort of the danger area that I guess. But, I love when an actor has a different way of doing things and wants to try something different and feels free enough, to do that. I think it's great and should be encouraged.
What if a director can tell that something is untruthful or not working with an actor in a scene? How do you approach the actor?
It's a tricky and difficult thing, I find anyway. But I think the most important thing to keep in mind is to speak, first of all, privately and quietly with the actor. That's, I've visited people on sets and I see these directors over in Video Village at the monitor and cut. No, you're not funny enough. It's gotta be funny. Make them laugh, And the actors, oh my God, I just think that's horrible. So I tend to, after every take, even if I don't have a note, I will go to the actor and just, hey, doing good. This is great, and I just try to talk about something softly because if you give an actor an adjustment publicly, now everyone's watching and they know now they're being judged. Did they get this note? Did they nail it? Is it still not right? It's a little bit. So I just try to work very privately with the actor and just give them just a gentle thing. And I never, give them, as I said, like a line reading. I just try to get them to ask themselves questions about what are you feeling here, And if I feel something's wrong, it's not working, I'll just say to them, so what are you feeling in this, in this scene? And they'll tell me, and sometimes that's like, of course, so that's not at all what we're really doing here. And I'll say to them, well, try this. What if you were feeling this? And usually they'll go with that. There's always a moment where they, nope, I don't want to do that. Then now you're in the bad actor director nightmare, which is very hard for the director to win unless you're a big director. But I find that most of my relationships with actors has mostly been really healthy and positive and respectful. And, I sort of get the courage it takes to do what they do. And I do feel, because as a writer, sometimes you get locked into a certain cadence you hear about the line, the way the line has to be spoken. And the actor doesn't see it that way. And they're not saying it that way. And if it's really egregious, I might say to him something or her, something specific as, I'd love to hear that just with the emphasis on that word instead of this word and see how that, And I get a good result sometimes I don't. And what I've learned is that you just have to let it go at a certain point if the actor is just not doing it. Even if they're trying hard to do it, if they don't hear it the way you hear it, it's going to be false if they force themselves to do it. So many a time I just have to walk away thinking, I'm not going to force them. And the reality is you're the only one in the world who knows that there was a different meaning about that line or a different emphasis on that line. So it's always going to bother me when I hear it, but no one else is ever going to notice it or feel it. And so you have to kind of let go and not make everything so precious. Because an actor, if you cast the right actor, you want them to bring to the table their interpretation, their quirks, their ideas, and it's going to sometimes bump up against yours. And unless it's something that's really story altering, I almost always go in favor of what the actor wants to do, unless it's just crazy. But I trust their instincts, and they know what works for them, and so I'm usually happy to let them do it. By the same token, if an actor ever asks for another take, yeah, absolutely, and that can get abusive too. It could be a point where they don't want to move on; they're just going to, let me try one more time. But I think you're crazy, even though you might have a take that you think is fantastic. That's a great take. I'm ready to move on. You want to move on. You have to move on. But the actor says, "Can I just try one more?" You got to do it, because it might be something incredible. Even if it isn't, the actor knows that they're heard and that they got their shot, and that you're not going to just cut them off.
Why do you like twist endings?
I guess I loved them as a kid growing up. I loved trying to see the twist coming, trying to solve it. I rarely could as a kid, and I just love the idea of your expectations and your experience kind of being turned on its head, and was something else all along. I love that, and I've on Ghost Whisperer we started developing this idea of twists with every episode, and then twist upon twists and all kinds of things. And so I really got very comfortable with it in that, and loved it. And now in these short films, I'm doing it all the time. I just, almost all of them have had at least one twist. I usually try to get 3 twists in to really confuse the audience so that they don't see it coming. And in the short film, it's particularly difficult because you have so little time to lay the pipe for a twist. And so the audience, and if they know there's going to be a twist, they know they're watching this film because it can't possibly just be this. There's got to be something else going on with this character. So you have to, it's a delicate balance of having to try to redirect the audience and sort of have a red herring twist that they think it's going to be, and then the actual twist, which they can never see coming. And every movie I do, it becomes harder and harder to come up with that twist of, well, we never saw that coming. But it's fun. It's a great challenge to do it.
Why would you say it's become harder? Is it because so much has been done?
So much has been done, and there's a thing of trying to top yourself. And again, it's the short film sort of format. And sometimes I just start with the ending. When I'm trying to develop a twist, I start with the ending, and then I go backwards. How many convolutions can I take away from this ending that makes it a surprise or makes it a twist? And then by doing it backwards, sometimes I can write a script in a linear way, beginning to end, with one final twist. But then I'll go backwards and think about where else can I put another twist? Where is there, look, in scene 3, I could plant this seed that no one's going to really notice, but then it's going to pay off in this scene. And then when the twist happens, everyone will be an aha moment of, that's why those things were there. So it's a mechanical thing in a way. It's like a craftsman kind of thing to do a good twist. And so now I kind of love them. And every time I write a short film, I become terrified I'm not going to be able to find a good twist or enough of them.
What is a Hollywood ending, and what's wrong with a Hollywood ending?
I don't know what that means today. I think at a certain point in film history, it referred to the idea of everyone is happy, everything's tied up in a bow, and you leave the theater completely satisfied and everything's good. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that, and that's certainly what a lot of people go to the movies for. They don't want to have enough depression and unhappiness in their lives. They don't need to see it on screen. But for an artist, it's normally just an unsatisfying way to work. And for most writers and directors and actors, you just want to do work that reflects life a little more. It doesn't have to be not uplifting, but realistic. Just want it to be a little more realistic. And I think that the idea of a Hollywood ending it's not really prevalent that much anymore. I think because of the streaming, influx of streaming services and digital everything, I think audiences are growing more sophisticated and are more willing to accept a convoluted ending or a more complex ending. And I mean, I haven't gotten a note like that in years about about an ending to make it more palatable or more Hollywood.
How do you pull off a twist ending?
Well, it's really like a magician's trick. It's about misdirection. It's about telling the audience to look over here when what I'm really doing is over here. And it's really tricky because we were just talking about how sophisticated audiences are today. So, they see it coming right away. So you really got to be careful. And what I try to do with like a triple twist kind of a thing is I set something up that the audience right away feels like, oh, this is what it's going to be. It's going to be, I know it, I can tell right away. And you play that along. And then at the same time, I try to introduce what I would call the red herring twist, which is a little thing that you weave into a scene that you do it in such a way that the audience is going to notice it. And they're going to think that they just caught you. This is why this guy's there, because in the end, it's going to be that. And you play that in a few scenes. You play those expectations, and you try to disguise it. Like, I'm being clever now, and I'm going to try to pull this over on you, but you're too smart for me. And in the meantime, there's a third thing that just comes out of the blue that they never saw coming. It's been there the whole time, because you can't just do Deus ex machina. You can't just. You've got to have it woven in, but it's something that they never really thought about as something that's going to pay off. So, this sounds very esoteric. It's becomes more obvious in the actual execution of it. But that's the way I do it. And like oftentimes my first pass on a script, I'll do the obvious choice and then the red herring choice, and then I got to really struggle to figure, okay, how is it even different, even another twist on this twist that we plant in the beginning that no one realizes we've been tracking this whole time. So it's fun. It's great fun to pull it off. And what's wonderful about it, and I love about my short films, is to sit in an audience, in a theater at a film festival, and have people react to those twists. It's fantastic. And it's one of the things I love about short films, by the way, because of my TV work, I wasn't connected to the audience. Everyone's watching on TV in their home, and I don't know. But on the film festival circuit, where I'm a regular with these short films, it's phenomenal. And people seem to love short films. These screenings are packed. And we get these big theaters, and it's about as good an experience as you can have making a movie, watching your story unfold, even if it's just 10 minutes, with an audience that gets it.
Is there a director, a writer-director that you remember from the beginning, watching movies back in Brooklyn, that was the master of the twist ending?
Well, I guess Hitchcock, of course, comes to mind, immediately. But I think I became more enamored as a kid of the twist ending in literature, things that I would read. And, you have so much more opportunity to do twists in fiction because your readers can't see anything. So you could be describing a character or a location in a way that can disguise the fact that it's really this, or this person is really that person, the unreliable narrator. But you don't have that luxury with a movie because they're seeing everything you're doing. So it's that much more challenging. But the answer to the question is, as a kid, I remember reading detective fiction and that kind of stuff, and really being drawn in by a good twist that I didn't see coming.
Should the end of a story always tie back to the beginning?
I don't know if it always, like a rule. I think it's great if it does. It's a great thing visually to do, and I think it gives the audience more of a feeling that they've done this complete journey. I did not to aggrandize myself, but I did a movie once about the relationship between Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin, and I began the movie in Dean Martin's dressing room on a close-up of a glass of scotch with ice cubes in it. And I held on it for a long time. In the background, you could hear a nightclub. You could hear some muffled comic and people laughing and hooting. And then a hand came into the frame and took the drink, and we revealed Dean Martin. And at the end of the movie, when they break up, it also happens this time in Jerry's dressing room. And they're saying goodbye. They just had their farewell performance at the Copacabana. We've gone through like 10 years of their lives. And when Dean says goodbye, and they just have this very awkward kind of parting, full of pain. Talk about subtext. They're dying inside, each one of them, but neither one can talk about it. They can just do these perfunctory, good show, yeah, best one, okay, good, take care. Meantime, it's like, oh, don't leave me. So we did the scene, and then afterwards, I leave with Jerry just looking in the mirror when Dean's walked away, and I pan down and I find a glass of scotch. Just mirror the first shot, totally. And so, that's just an example, again, not that but I'm such a genius, but those are really great visual ways to tie things in. And I had to fight with the network about keeping that. Cut on his face, just cut out on his face. No, there's a reason. But anytime you can tie in the beginning to the end or any other part of the movie, callbacks are always, the joke in movies, you can never pull a gun on screen without having that gun play somehow in the movie. You can't show it. And I feel like that's true about everything in a movie. You can't introduce anything in a film that doesn't somehow call back later. And even if it's a character, everything in the movie has to be there for a reason. And I think it teaches you a great discipline in writing if you try to apply that to everything you write. Okay, I'm going to introduce this prop, this person, this event. And it can't be just there for the sake of being there. It's got to be there to serve the story. And so how do we call it back later on?
And callbacks are different than bookending?
I suppose so. I think they can be the same, but they could also be different in that, a callback, just could be even just a fun thing where we see a joke introduced at the beginning of a film. Someone always loses their glove. And then, a third of the way through the film, that comes up again, that lose the glove. And again, it's an example of never let something go to waste. Don't introduce someone who loses the glove and then not somehow bring that back later, not pay that off in some way. So I think if you have to be strict about it, bookends obviously being in the end of a film, and callbacks can just happen anywhere in the body of a movie. But also, I don't want to feel like there's rules like that. They really aren't. It's just about what you feel works for your story.
I have a line of dialogue for you. People are always going to want to see movies, Ma, not just on TV or in the theaters.
Sounds
Which
familiar.
I love. So that's a line from your movie, White Irish Drinkers, and love the film. The young protagonist, Brian, is his name? Okay. He's trying to convince his working class mom, Karen Allen, in the film, that entertainment is important.
It's true. And it's also a poignant callback to the idea that we all know movie theaters are not going to be the only place to see movies, and people are not always going to want to go to movie theaters to see movies. And so it's a more idealized time, and the film is set in 1975. And I always find it kind of poignant to see a character's hopes and dreams from the point of view of the future where we know this isn't going to happen. And there's another moment in the film where his girlfriend, Nora, is talking about her dreams of being a travel agent because she's going to get to travel the world. And she says to Brian, people are always going to want to travel, and they're always going to need a travel agent to do it for them. And of course, we know that's nonsense now. It's like, Expedia, hello. And so there's something to me poignant about that, and with our knowledge, armed with our knowledge now, that what the world is versus what it was.
And I love too that he felt like he had to hide his paintings, and not that they were of anything bad, or that he just wasn't very upfront about them.
Right.
And
well, it's a cultural thing too, and it comes from the experience I had growing up, where wanting to be a filmmaker, you might as well say, I want to be an astronaut. They probably think it's more realistic for you to be an astronaut than, a filmmaker. A lot of times there was really no value placed on it. What is that? What do you want? It was a pipe dream. Yeah, everyone wants to be, you know. So, you know, I would be embarrassed to admit to people what I want to do because I'd be made fun of, you know. And I made films as a kid. I made Super 8 films. I enlisted my friends, you know, to help me make them. But it was always frustrating because, you know, beyond a certain point, the enthusiasm would wane from my friends because it's, you know, it's hard work. Even making a little Super 8 movie, you know, it takes hours. It's hard work. And now, you know, listen, we want to go play ball, man. You know, and so it was always difficult to find people with my level of passion to work as hard as I want to do to make these movies. And so, you just in the neighborhood, it just wasn't something that. Yeah, I remember I had a summer job once in the parks department, and it was a ridiculous job. You know, they didn't really need any help there, but they were trying to. It was a program for underprivileged kids to go and work in the summer, and so I worked with these park department guys who were just these, you know, these dems and those kind of guys, you know, and he said to me one of them said, "So kid, what do you do with yourself in your spare time? What do you do?" I said, "Well, I make movies." "Oh, movies? What kind of movies? Yeah, can I be in them?" You know. And so that was sort of the level that you were dealing with. So it just became easier to be quiet about it and not. And you know, much easier for someone like Brian because he doesn't need help. He can just paint by himself. And the idea that this is always something that's moved me all the time. Just the idea that someone suspects they may have a talent for something. They suspect that it could be big. And that not necessarily big in terms of fame or fortune, but big in terms of it can take me out of the life I'm in and put me in a different life. And I'm always, every time I read a story about somebody who's, you know, who came from terrible circumstances and because of their art, you know, got out of it and became a different person. You know, like for instance, my father. You know, I love my father very much. And my mother and he broke up when I was very young. My brother and I, and I would see him on the weekends, and he was just a real original character, tough, you know, iron worker. And it turned out, I found out later, that he had an incredibly high IQ. And when he served in World War II, he took an aptitude test, I suppose, and they gave him an anti-aircraft gunner job, which apparently was that era's version of like a high-tech job because he was so smart. And you know, he got out of the Army and he went back to work in construction, and that's what he did. You know? And I always would think to myself, I get lost in these thoughts about like, what if there had been a different circumstance for him, a different opportunity, if he had gone to college, if he had read more, if I don't know what, and not to be elitist about it either, because I'm not saying there's anything wrong with his life. He loved being an iron worker. He was very good at it. But, you know, it just always made me think about this whole nurture versus nature issue. And had he been born in different circumstances, would he be a doctor? Would he be a philosopher? Would he be, you know, same guy, but different. So that kind of thing always moves me, and I think about it all the time. And that character was very real for me because that's, you know, he's afraid to leave his neighborhood because it's safe and he understands it. It's the world he knows and he's comfortable in. And outside the neighborhood is all things that are terrifying to him. And so his friend's going off to college, wants him to come with him because his friend is smart enough to know Brian has talent and he has to get out of this, and he has to get away from his father in the movie. Brian's afraid to do it. So can he find the courage to bet on his talent? And you know, will that work? And so that's really his character's dilemma and what he has to try to struggle with. And you know, that moment is my favorite in the movie where his mother is angry at him because, you know, she doesn't know why he's in that basement. What's he doing in that basement? You doing drugs down there? You know, I'm going to kill you if you're doing drugs down there. No, I'm not doing drugs, Ma. And you know, the brother gets arrested, and mother's upset, and she has to go tell Brian, get your father out of the bar and tell him your brother's been arrested. And she calls him, he doesn't answer. Son of a bitch, he's in that basement. And she tears down the stairs, and she comes face to face with these paintings that she's never seen. And it's something about him that she's never known or suspected. And so I just get emotional even thinking about it because it was so well performed by the actors. And so those are the key moments for me. That's a life-changing moment for her because suddenly she's faced with this absolute evidence that this kid is talented in a way that they can't even fathom. They have no idea what to even do with this. So anyway, that's really why I felt just so strongly about that character. I think it's a universal thing with that character. You know, so many people feel that they have to hide their talent or hide who they are because it may not be approved of, or they may not succeed at it. And so, I always dream of someday of making a sequel to that movie, and see where they all ended up. But anyway, that's White Irish Drinkers.
And what I love too is so much of it is the fight against staying in the neighborhood and getting the safe job versus I got to get out of here. I can't end up
Right.
like my parents, or I can't end up, I know my fate if I stay here.
Yes, yes, and there's a fear. Some people just naturally fearless, like Todd, the character Todd, who's going to go to college. He's going to go off to Pennsylvania, and he's not worried about leaving the neighborhood, or he can't wait for new things. But for a lot of people like Brian, and I have to admit it was I had to fight it myself. There's a fear about, am I a fraud? Can I make it outside my comfort zone? And it's really difficult to take that step. As a kid, I could fantasize about being a Hollywood director, and I'm going to make movies, and I'm going to have this life, and I'm going to express myself. But then when the reality of that comes, yes, okay, but you can't do that in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. You've got to do that here or there. And you have to travel. You have to be there for months to do it, and in a place that you've never been before. And so, for a lot of people, that's great. What's the problem? But for people who have more of a parochial, kind of, existence, you grow up in these small neighborhoods where, people in the neighborhood who barely went to Manhattan. It was like a big drudgery. Oh shit! I gotta go into the city today. And so the fear is becoming like that. For people like me and Brian, who ultimately realizes he can't stay. He can't protect his mother. He can't stay for that. He's got to go.
Right, and it's interesting too about the forces that try to hold you back. Because
Right.
they don't want to see you leave. Maybe they don't want you to go,
Exactly.
or who do you think you are?
Right. You're better than me. What are you better than me? And because it makes them ask questions about themselves that they don't want to think about. Never mind answer. And that is true. There are a lot of, and it's not only generational. It's within a group of friends that people might don't you're a traitor. You leave your neighborhood. Turn your back. You turn your back on us, your friends. What's the matter? There's a lot of heavy guilt, and it's all about I don't want to make the same decision. You can't be braver than me.